Superman, also known as Clark Kent, is the legendary alien from the planet Krypton, the main hero of countless comics and films and a symbol of justice. But what if he were to side with evil? This question has been raised many times in comics, and evil Superman is usually defeated using kryptonite, his only known weakness. This leads to the question, can an evil superhero be stopped using only Earth-based technology? It's important to note that this would only be possible if Superman lived among humans for a long time and didn't show any signs of hostility, allowing scientists to study his biology under some pretense and determine potential vulnerabilities. And of course, only if Superman doesn't find out about the plan to eliminate him beforehand and intervene. In the case of a hostile Superman suddenly arriving from space, it's highly unlikely that Earthlings could harm him at all. In this episode, we've gathered all of Superman's weaknesses to figure out how he could be destroyed in reality. Interestingly, kryptonite is not Kal-El's only weakness. There have only been two villains capable of killing Superman: Doomsday, who is physically much stronger, and the Anti-Monitor, a villain who destroys entire universes. However, many enemies have managed to significantly injure the hero. If we were to list them all, the list would be quite long. But from this history of battles, we can identify some of the key vulnerabilities of our hero. Besides kryptonite and red sun radiation, Superman is also highly vulnerable to magic, so we definitely wouldn't want to see him end up in a fantasy world. He wouldn't last long there. Any powerful sorcerer could give him a very hard time. Superman's first and most obvious weakness is the sun. Yes, the yellow star gives Kryptonians all their power. However, it's not that simple. In essence, Clark Kent is a living battery, constantly absorbing solar energy. It's difficult to determine exactly which part of the energy he absorbs, but most likely it's light energy. To avoid atmospheric and dust interference that scatters sunlight, Superman would either recharge in space or lie under powerful focusing lenses in the Fortress of Solitude. If Superman is deprived of solar energy, he will begin to lose his powers until he becomes a regular mortal. Theoretically, this is easy to do. Lure him into a dark bunker and lock him inside. But Superman is incredibly strong, and no earthly metal or concrete can hold him long enough for him to fully run out of energy. So this method won't work if the goal is to kill him, but it can weaken him. Aside from a lack of solar energy, an overload of it can also kill Superman. In one comic, when Clark Kent was unable to defeat Doomsday, he flew too close to the sun, supercharged himself, and overwhelmed the villain. However, his body soon began to break down. The solar energy overload killed Superman. His cells began irreversible apoptosis, and he started to die. In reality, this wouldn't help humanity much. Let's suppose, under some pretense, Superman could be lured close to the sun. Say he's fed false information that a secret human weapon capable of destroying alien invaders is headed toward the star. The cover story might be that the weapon needs to charge using solar energy, while in fact, it's just a regular satellite. Let's assume Superman takes the bait and flies to the sun to destroy the satellite. On one hand, he would be sealing his fate, but on the other hand, he wouldn't die immediately. It would take several months for the process to kill him. And during that time, he would return to Earth angry and overpowered, then begin steamrolling humanity, just like Omni-Man did to the Flaxans. So luring him to the sun might work, but it comes with serious consequences. Another weakness of Clark Kent is red sunlight, the kind that surrounded his home planet. Often, red light lamps were used as a main tool in battles against Superman. These lamps were made entirely without kryptonite or Kryptonian technology. From the descriptions of the red sun, it's likely a red dwarf, a dying star that has burned through all its hydrogen and started consuming itself, causing its luminosity to drop significantly. That's why Kryptonians on their home planet have abilities no greater than those of normal humans. Instead of superpowers, Kryptonians are exposed to a generous flow of solar winds charged with decaying radon particles, which give the star its signature red hue. But these radon-based conditions are part of a speculative theory that the Kryptonian solar system formed in a region of the universe rich in heavier elements. That would explain the abundance of radioactive isotopes there. Since we can't recreate a red sun on Earth to weaken Superman, it's obvious that some component of its radiation affects his biology. So most likely, Kryptonians are vulnerable specifically to radon. This would mean that exposed radon lamps, while emitting weak alpha radiation, can deal significant damage to Superman's body, just as they would to a human. However, alpha radiation is far less dangerous to us than it is to Superman. That's why many villains and heroes alike are able to severely beat Superman when he's weakened by the light of such lamps. The next of Superman's weaknesses, the legendary green kryptonite, a fictional radioactive material that emits something which causes all Kryptonians to weaken to the level of ordinary humans, or even die. Its radiation can be blocked by a thin layer of lead or steel, which villains often used when bringing kryptonite-infused weapons into battle against Clark Kent. Batman used a similar tactic in Zack Snyder's movie. Although he wore power armor, it wasn't fully enclosed. His face was, as usual, partially exposed even inside the helmet. However, in our hypothetical confrontation between an evil Superman and humanity, kryptonite simply doesn't exist. No meteorite with it has ever fallen to Earth. So what then? Is there a real-world substitute for this substance? Where could we find an equivalent? Time to begin some domestic kryptonite substitution. Here's what we know about kryptonite's properties. Its radiation can be reflected, redirected, or focused into a beam. From that, we can assume the material emits high-energy alpha particles, particles with energy levels comparable to those produced in particle accelerators. The exact mechanism by which these alpha particles affect Kryptonian biology remains unclear, but apparently, they are what shut down Superman's superpowers. There's even a hint that alpha particles affect Superman negatively in the previous section, when he flew close to the sun. It's possible that, as a result of nuclear fusion reactions in the sun's core, alpha particles are released, and they may have contributed to Superman's deterioration. However, the harmful effects were delayed due to the sheer amount of solar energy he absorbed at the same time. It turns out that it's possible to injure or at least significantly weaken Superman using a weapon that fires alpha particles. But how would one do that? Alpha particles are essentially helium nuclei, 2 protons and 2 neutrons moving at high energy. If we run regular helium through a plasma torch, it will lose its electrons and become alpha particles. However, this method is extremely expensive and inefficient. First of all, you'd need a lot of helium. Second, the energy efficiency would be low. You'd need to roast Superman for about 20 minutes, just to give him a minor burn. Another option shown in the comics is to detonate a nuclear charge containing uranium-238. This is very painful for Superman, but still not very effective. Alternatively, you could lure Superman into a radon bath filled with radium-226. That would be fairly effective, but it requires a large amount of radium, which is rare in nature. So the most reliable option would be alpha particles generated by a particle collider or a tokamak reactor. These devices are capable of producing alpha particles in massive quantities, and those particles can even penetrate lead plating. A collider or tokamak is a type of controlled nuclear fusion reactor, which uses deuterium and tritium. When exposed to extremely high temperatures, these elements begin to fuse, producing helium ions. This fusion reaction occurs at temperatures exceeding 100 million degrees Celsius, several times hotter than the sun's core. Therefore, if we build plasma-based weapons powered by a fusion reactor, we could create a stream of alpha particles with immense destructive power that theoretically could suppress all of Superman's abilities and eventually even completely disintegrate him. But first, he needs to be lured toward the weapon, as it will certainly not be very mobile. It's also necessary to provide protection for the crew and electronics of this weapon. After all, in addition to a very angry Superman, they will also be exposed to the radiation produced by the device. Another strength and simultaneously a weakness of Superman is his heightened sensitivity to hearing and vision. For example, the villainous Silver Banshee once used her scream to disorient the Kryptonian. From this, we can deduce that extremely loud sounds over 210 decibels can cause serious damage even to such a durable organism. For a human, such a sound would be almost instantly fatal. In fact, many scientists consider sounds above 194 decibels no longer just sound, but shockwaves, which is close to the truth. A sound that powerful would blow away light objects and shatter windows, even from a considerable distance. Unfortunately, such sonic weapons would be dangerous to everyone. The directional pattern of a sound weapon doesn't form immediately, and around such a cannon there would be a zone of total destruction, which limits the possibility of using them near people. However, such a weapon could be built as a drone and operated remotely. Another method of sensory overload could be a powerful electric discharge, which might even paralyze Superman. But we mustn't forget his inhuman endurance. In one of the animated films depicting the confrontation between Batman and Superman, the billionaire used all the electricity in Gotham to deliver a strong, painful, yet still non-lethal electric shock, one from which Superman recovered within seconds, just as he did from the previously used sonic cannon. This shows that sensory overload can harm, but is not capable of killing the superhero. Or perhaps we simply haven't yet seen powerful enough methods to actually defeat him. Still, such weapons could be used as an intermediate stage in the fight against Superman, tools to buy time for further actions. In general, Superman has low susceptibility to poisons, but there have been a few interesting exceptions. In the 2013 film Man of Steel, we were shown that the atmosphere of Superman's home planet, Krypton, was toxic for him. Superman could barely stay on his feet while breathing Kryptonian air, which suggests that if not toxicity, then at least the lack of certain elements necessary for his powers was at play. However, the exact composition of Krypton's atmosphere was never revealed, making it impossible to recreate it. It was also shown that the supervillainous Poison Ivy somehow managed to develop a toxin or pheromones that affected Superman, turning him into an obedient slave. In that state, Superman nearly killed Batman. We don't know the exact composition of the substance Poison Ivy created, but it likely didn't include anything unavailable on Earth, which makes this kind of toxin a fairly realistic option. From this, we can conclude that while Superman can go without breathing for a very long time, he does in fact breathe, and can potentially be poisoned. It's only a matter of finding the right chemical. In general, you could probably write dozens of dissertations on the psychology of superheroes, but we're interested in specific traits that apply to Superman, since psychologically he was once defeated by an entirely ordinary human, the Joker. In all his incarnations, Superman exhibits certain unflattering traits, such as arrogance and a kind of condescending attitude toward humanity. Because of this, he has often been injured in battles against opponents who were clearly weaker than him. He's taken quite a few rather sneaky hits. For example, the kryptonite bullet from Bloodsport, which he could have easily dodged. Simply put, Superman can be bluffed into taking a hit, or one could start playing on his emotions, which he feels much more intensely than regular humans. In short, a skilled psychological manipulator could break the rather fragile core of the so-called Man of Steel. If none of our previous plans work, there's only one option left. Try to hit Superman with antimatter. Throughout all of human history, we've only managed to produce less than a nanogram of antimatter in total. This required enormous colliders smashing particles together at near light speed with over 1,000 scientists working countless hours. But to defeat Superman, we'd need at least a few grams, or even several kilograms, of antimatter to annihilate him. The resulting annihilation reaction would create an explosion comparable to the Tsar Bomba, or potentially many times stronger. What would happen after such an explosion is hard to predict, but there's a high probability that Superman would be killed, along with everything else in the surrounding area. So, that's how it is. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below the video. Share your ideas. Thanks for watching. Good luck to everyone. See you next time.